The
Ora si
Museum of
registrerà la conferenza.
Public Relations, the Museum of Public Relations, and it was the first time that anyone had ever attempted to do anything like this. And now, whether it was a good or a bad attempt, it's too late. There's not much point in asking these questions. The fact is that it has become a very, very important point of reference for a lot of people around the world. I have friends in Africa, in Asia, in China, in Latin America, who are addicted to the PR Museum website, and now the website has become, as you all know very well, a major Facebook presence, and they have a physical place now. I'm not sure that it's still in WeWork, but I imagine it is in New York City downtown. And they receive students from all over the world, scholars from all over the world. Everybody wants to go and see the documents. It's full of very interesting materials. They have an enormous amount of passion. And a lot of very interesting things are going on, particularly, and I will now close very quickly, the issues that they mostly focus on are gender diversity, racial diversity, religious diversity, forms of historic practice from the pyramids to today, in which you find an enormous amount of materials which are extremely interesting for what we do all the time. The passion that she has is infinite, and Barry is an enormous support and help, and the technical help, and more than apart from the brain, but also the technical help, because Shelley is not like me. She's much better than I am, but she still doesn't understand what the fuck the thing is all about. So I love Shelley. She was the muse of a person that I had met when he was 92, I believe, if I'm not wrong, who was Edward Bernays. And she was the muse in the sense that she looked after Bernays. She went to see him, visited him regularly. She went to brought him materials, took materials from her, took papers, put papers together, made photographs, made things, and the whole legacy that we have of Bernays comes from her and from Barry. And then she started doing this with a lot of other people too, including Harold Merson just last week, who just moved to Atlanta at the age of what, 94, 93, something like that?
98 and a half.
Yeah, 98 and a half, my God, yes. And so she is the legacy and the history of our profession, not only in the United States. There are, of course, issues which relate to Europe, which relate to the relationship between the museum and the European scholars and things like that. But these are all pleasant issues. They are not nasty issues. Usually, when you have nothing to say, you fight. But as she has a lot of things to say, she doesn't fight. She gets along with everybody. So that's where we are. I'm going to stop there, Biagio, and let you take it on. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tony. And we leave the floor to Shelley, starting to talk about this unique museum of public relations. Thank you very much, Shelley, to be with us, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very, very much, Tony, and everybody at Ferpi, for allowing me to talk to you today, which is the day after our Thanksgiving here, where most people would still be in bed, I guess, recovering from all the wine that they had last night. but because of this, I got up early, and I appreciate the opportunity to be speaking to you today. I think you could see a picture there of me interviewing Bernays. That could have been one of the first days that my then boyfriend, Barry, and I went up to Cambridge, Massachusetts to visit Bernays, who became, we all became very, very good friends for the last 10 years of his life. So much so that when Bernays met, well, when Barry and I got married in 1986 and then eventually had children, our little kids grew up thinking that Bernays was their third grandfather. So that's how close we became with the family. And after he died at the age of 103 and a half, the family invited us up to go and take stuff from Bernays's house to set up a museum, which we said we would do after he had passed away. And even though we had promised Bernays we were going to set up a museum, my husband Barry, who was an artist, and I had no experience in creating a museum, which is why one of the first things that we did was we made an online museum. And in fact, we were the very first museum to become an online museum. So it wasn't a museum that we put on a website. It was the whole website was the museum. We didn't have a physical presence as of yet. And that was 1997 or before. And then at some point soon, we started taking the Bernays exhibits and putting them on display in the city, and then eventually having one whole room. And when people got word of the museum, people would start sending us stuff from all over the world that they thought should be on display at the museum. So while at first it was entirely stuff from Bernays, as well as his oral histories, eventually we got the archives from Dr. Ray Hebert, who is the biographer of Ivy Lee. So our Ivy Lee collection is tremendous. And we found some very exciting things. We have Ivy Lee's address book from 1930, which has a list of all his friends and business contacts at the time, which included all the Rockefellers and the Vanderbilts and the Astors. We also have an unpublished manuscript, typewritten manuscript that nobody knew about from 1927. So we have Arthur Page's ashtray and a lot of his papers. We have photographs, but now we have found that there is a history of public relations, at least in the United States, and I suspect the world too, that has been not told. The kids in school today learn about a history that was founded by 3 white men, which included, of course, P.T. Barnum, Ivy Lee, and Bernays. But this history is very off-putting, especially to diverse young people today, because all they see are diverse men. Where are the women? Where are the Latinos? Where are the African Americans? And so we've spent the past 4 years or so uncovering this other history, this hidden history of public relations. And this history has turned up some fascinating people, such as Joseph Baker and Inez Kaiser, who was the first Black woman to open up a PR firm, which she did in 1957. Of course, we had Ophiel Dukes, which a lot of people knew about, but there were other people like Moss Kendricks, D. Park Gibson, and these people started PR firms or started working in the industry at a time when there was mass discrimination. So how they succeeded is really a wonderful story. And, when you ask people today, how long do you think women have been in the PR business? People say, well, maybe not until the 70s. Well, in fact, the first woman that we know of in public relations started in 1919, and that was Doris Fleischman Bernays, Bernays' wife. And she did a significant amount of work that has always been credited to Bernays, but she in her own right was a terrific writer. And a lot of the ideas, which have since become case studies that we know about, like Torches of Freedom and Ivory Soap and the Green Ball, I suspect, and I've interviewed her daughter Anne about this, I suspect that Doris had a lot to do with those ideas. So we, since then, have found a lot of other women who have been pioneers over the last century in PR. And I hope that what we've been doing the past 4 years by showcasing these people inside the museum, as well as the many diversity events that we have inspired minorities in this country to get into the field, that this is a field that welcomes them. So that's been our goal. And now we're facing, you know, of course, other diversity kind of problems, which I'll get into, but that's just a short introduction to the museum. When Tony was talking about how people have become addicted to our website and social media, there are now universities in different parts of the world that depend on our Facebook posts every day. And if I don't post on a particular day, I get messages on Facebook saying, you haven't posted anything today, I need it for my class. So we're very conscious of that, and I feel in some small way we've become a major resource for developing countries around the world, in for instance in Ghana and Estonia and Guam, Indonesia, all over the place. There are now public relations majors at universities and some some form of public relations industries going on in these countries. So that's very, very interesting as well. So we are not as international as I hope we will someday be. We're in talks with some organizations around the world. And also, as Tony probably knows, for the first time next June, the Bournemouth is coming to Boston. So I think I'll be making a presentation there, hopefully alongside Gunter. And he could talk about his museum, which is the only other museum of public relations that I know of. And we will start to become more recognized by the international PR community. And my hope is that other countries will have their own museums of public relations history that tells the story about their own individual countries.
Oh, thank you, Shelley. It's a great encouragement, I think, for all of us that are not only professional but also fanatic about the history of the public relations. Let's go to another topic that you are keen to talk about, the current trends in PR US and the state of PR education in US.
Okay, well, I'll talk about the state of education because I think it's trying to reflect the current state of the industry. And so I do a lot of lectures, and I am no longer on the, I no longer teach as an adjunct at NYU or Baruch, but I do a lot of lecturing. And I also have schools coming downtown to see the museum itself. And here is something that I'm finding, which is many people may not consider this a problem, or many people may think that, oh my God, look at how the scales have turned, and isn't that good? I don't think it's very good. We're seeing fewer and fewer guys in the classes. And just a couple of weeks ago, I was down south at a major university, and I taught classes ranging from 25 to 30, and there were either 1 or 2 guys, or maybe even no guys. And one guy I spoke to, I said, how does it feel to be the only guy in this class? I figured he would say, oh, that's terrific. Well, I love it. I love all this attention. But he said he's now thinking about changing majors to broadcast journalism, where there are far more guys. And if this keeps up, we're going to have, an industry that is kind of 180 degrees from the industry that it was when I first joined in the late 70s, where it was entirely guys, except that you had women secretaries. But now we don't have secretaries anymore, so we're primarily women. And that is not going to be good. I know that there are industries, we have clients who really want to work with other guys, and for whatever reason, mostly because these are engineering-based companies, they may be more comfortable with guys. But we have to find a way to stem the tide of this problem soon, because we don't want to be seen as a pink-collar industry. Now, of course, there are guys in the business who are running the holding companies that own the PR firms. There are the CEOs who are guys, but for the most part, the worker bees are women. And nobody has really talked about this issue, and because we've been focused on the racial disparities in the industry and trying to attract and retain more African Americans and Latinos in this business, so that our agencies reflect the population, the markets that we're reaching out to. Well, now, we're facing, only 75%, well, 75 to 25% disparity in gender. And so we won't be reflective much longer, or we're not reflective today of the population outside of the agency. So I think another situation that regards the current trends in PR, as well as the state of PR education, is the fact that, and this is really a very deep problem, and this to me is the most important problem, is that there is a loss of focus on traditional media being taught in the classroom. And also in agencies who are trying to look all technological and futuristic, they too seem to be emphasizing social media at the expense of traditional media. So when you talk about placing a story in the media, the students, the young people, will particularly talk about, oh, I can just set up a Twitter account, or I could just set up get on a Facebook post. But what this does is it takes the attention away from the idea that we've all grown up with about making news, making something newsworthy. And a lot of students don't even know what I'm talking about. Traditional media relations has become optional in the PR majors. They don't have to learn how to write news. And that's a terrible problem too, because we're turning out really poor writers. And I'm beginning to think, and this could be, a very dramatic statement, that we shouldn't have PR majors. We should just be teaching everybody journalism, and then some of them might want to go into PR. But the skills that I see in journalism today are far more relevant to PR than what I see coming out of PR schools. And there's just not the attention that needs to be paid to traditional journalism, news writing, news reading, understanding what makes a good story. And I can tell you that at least on the B2B side, our clients want traditional media. They don't want, the social media is something that they feel that they can do. Whether they could do it well or not is up for discussion. But the students coming out of school today that I'm interviewing, at least, are not as focused on traditional media as they ought to be. And if they would read the newspaper every day, as we used to be required to do, they would also become better news writers. So it's not just keeping on top of current events. You're also learning how to create a news story and write well.
This is something that in the first International Ferpi webinar, Jose Manuel Velasco, the past chair of Global Alliance, was telling us. So this problem that a lot of the business is focusing on the social media side, also on the marketing side, so the generation of lead, more than on the traditional stakeholder relation and media relation function that we used to have. So, and probably something that we see also in Italy, the poor writing among the youngsters is something that is quite common. For what regard instead the diversity in PR that you were saying, and you have already anticipated with the trend that you are seeing, so a lot of female students and practitioners. You have done a lot of initiative regarding the traditional terms of diversity. If you can tell us something about what you have done and the importance also of the diverse practitioners in the story of public relations.
So what happened a few years ago when we had the museum up at Baruch, we had a class of graduate students from George Washington University, and this was a very diverse class, and one of the young women in the front row raised her hand and said, "How come nobody in this room looks like me?" And it was true. We had photographs of Carl Bayer and Don Milton and John Hill and Arthur Page and Paul Garrett, and it was all white men. And that just changed everything in my mind. And so we felt it was extremely important to create role models and create the hidden history of public relations so that today's young people and today's students going into the field could see that they were people, extraordinarily talented and successful people who looked like them in the past. And I think that this has been somewhat, I don't know the numbers, but at least qualitatively speaking, the research has shown that because of these events, we've done now 3 years of events focused on diverse pioneers. They feel that they belong in this industry. They feel a greater connection to the past of this industry that had once been presented as just all white men, now being presented as highly diverse, both gender-wise and racial-wise. So last year, for the 50th anniversary of Stonewall, we had our first LGBTQ event, which was amazing because no industry had ever had that before. And this on the 50th anniversary of Stonewall, which itself was a terrific public relations campaign. You could look at it that way. And we had 2 full panels of agency people, corporate people, people who are social activists and agency owners. People came in the audience who never revealed themselves to be gay before. It was amazing. It was an amazing, amazing night full of emotion and tears and laughs. And we thought it was just going to be a one-time event, but then the popularity was so strong that people asked us to do it again this year. So we now have 4 regularly scheduled diversity events. As you see on the screen, we have a Black PR history. Then we'll have an event in March for Women's History Month called PR Women Who Change History. So it's not PR people necessarily, but what they've done to change history as far as civil rights, equal rights amendment, all kinds of social change that they enacted during their lives, many of whom are no longer alive. This year, we will be featuring a woman who is the CCO of AT&T, a woman named Marilyn Laurie, who had passed away 2011, who was my mentor, my role model as a young person. And she has some terrific stories about her life and the changes that she made inside AT&T, but also she was the mother of Earth Day, of the environmental movement. So then in June, we'll have our second LGBTQ event. And then in September, we'll have for Hispanic Heritage Month, we'll have another Latino PR history event.
That's great. It's very rich and stimulating. Probably we have one question from one of the colleagues online. Francesco, I will give you the microphone. You can talk.
Hello, can you hear me? Hello,
Yeah.
Shelley.
Hi, how are
Thank
you?
you for fine, thanks. Thank you for even show up today. Everything is very interesting. And first of all, of course, congratulations on this amazing museum. I think that we definitely could use more all around the world. What we were saying before, I totally agree with you. And also, it would be nice to imagine, like to give shape to sort of a network of PR museum,
Right. I'd love that.
because as is of course every country has its own peculiar history, but at the same time, every country share like at least a piece, a track of the path, so to speak. And these would enable like exchange of information, of perspectives, of best practices and histories, and also students, scholars, etc. So this could be an amazing idea.
I would love it. I've been trying for years to set up a similar museum. Talking to people in Argentina, there's an Edward Bernays, Docente Edward Bernays Society in Buenos Aires. I spoke to them a couple of weeks ago. I know that in London, they're talking about setting up a museum in London. There is a German museum, but that's just basically online. But a couple of years ago, I was at an eco conference or an awards dinner in London, and people from all over the world were coming up to me and saying, how can we do this? How can we do this? And you just have to start doing it. You can't, I think that the longer you plan it, you have more people. And when you set up committees and budgets and all that, we were fortunate and unfortunate in that we had no money and no time to
Yeah, I think that I understand what you're trying to mean. Yeah.
We just didn't have any, Bernays died and the family calls us up. We go up with a truck and we get the stuff. But that doesn't happen in every case. I think that people who've tried this in the past have gotten bogged down with committee meetings and how do we get started and what do we show, and just start doing it.
But I think that your experience in this field could be terrific in helping people, to give life to sort of a format or a project.
Yes, absolutely. I think that we can talk about all of the experiences, both good and bad, and it's been quite a ride. It really has been, and I hope that we can lend some of our expertise, some of the problems we've had encountered, but also it's mostly been, if you look at the pictures online, it is an absolute joy. I can't even tell you. To host, we've had over the past year about 1,000 people, either coming to the museum, coming to our events, or seeing the museum online. About 1,000 young people from all over the world, And we have. It is true that we've all had a very similar beginnings that we share. So people who come from, we just had 2 women from Russia, people from Japan, New Zealand. Everybody senses that we had kind of similar roots. And especially when we talk about the very beginnings with Sigmund Freud. And then everybody went off and had started their own PR industries that are a little different. And that's what makes it fascinating.
Yeah. Also, when I first discovered your amazing museum, it came to my mind. Do you know the Canadian Museum for Human Rights in Winnipeg? Have you ever heard about it? I can paste a link here in the web chat. I think it's interesting because it was one of the first experience all around the world of a museum without walls, and this is interesting you know the concept about, because a museum is not necessarily the physical place, the physical seat of the museum. It's the idea, it's the mission behind. And especially, okay, when you make a museum about PR or even human rights, immediately the mind comes to documents, the proofs, but history is an intangible thing.
Yeah, yeah.
You got what, you know what I mean. So it's particularly useful in these cases to share experiences.
Absolutely. It's interesting. People will come, they're working on a client problem today, and they come to get ideas. What did people do back then? And very often they're looking at case studies from 100 years ago. 100 years ago.
Yeah.
And people think, oh, but that's so. No, people 100 years ago focused, they had to use their minds a lot more. They had to look at social sciences a lot more than today. I think today we're very quick to jump to the tactics rather than reasoning through a problem. So people came recently doing a public health awareness campaign for disease, and I showed them what Ivy Lee was doing in educating subway riders about tuberculosis. And this was in 1923. Or the public health campaigns we had for polio, in the 1930s and 40s. So a lot of we have a great resource here in the past in finding some great ideas out that may not be thought of today because of the concentration that we have on these social media tactics.
I have also a question, Shelley, regarding the skill that a PR pro should have, and especially what you were saying regarding social sciences. It was something that in the past we have discussed also together with Tony. I remember some years ago. What I see is that in the last years, our colleagues are not very focused on psychology, sociology, or probably the most common discipline that we are using, or the most trendy is neuromarketing. No? So it's something that makes probably everything much more similar to artificial intelligence and a mechanic practitioner than a humanity or a social science-based discipline. What do you think about this?
I know about the neuromarketing, and I think it's very interesting. A lot of the stuff that has to do with digital marketing today has more to do with consumer brands than it does the larger counseling that we ought to be doing, right? We jump right to, hey, AI, we're cool, we're neuromarketing, digital, but where is the focus on what the real problem is? And what are the audiences that we have to reach, and how do we most affect them? And maybe it's not about neuromarketing or AI, maybe it's something that's more diversified as far as the strategies. I think we're losing sight of putting the strategy before the tactics. What I see in the classroom is that people jump from the problem, the PR problem, immediately to the tactic. And it's like in the old days when I used to see people talk about the problem and jump right away to the press release. Today, they're jumping into, oh, we should do neuromarketing. That's really going to impress the client. Well, we've had a PR firm for nearly 30 years. It's been primarily based on business to business, granted, and and trade media, I would say, heavy duty engineering and financial. Do you know that never once has a client asked us to do social media? And never. And, we're not dealing with old fashioned clients either. We're dealing with fintech companies. We're dealing with, defense companies. So, and the answer is not always the external media. What we're doing with half of our clients today is internal work.
Yeah.
And I think that the students coming out of school have never even touched that, never even learned about internal stakeholders. And yet, extraordinarily important, or about, the investor relations audiences. And it's very easy and it's very cool to jump right into digital marketing and neuromarketing and all of that, and to become more like advertising. But it kind of, we kind of lose along the way the social science aspects of what made this business different than advertising to begin with. And I want to say something important about advertising. I have a 1939 copy of a magazine it's just called Public Relations, a great magazine. And it was just one issue, volume 1, number 1. I had articles there bylined by Pendleton Dudley and Carl Bayer and Ivy Lee Jr., the son of Ivy Lee. Very erudite, very scholarly. And there's one page that has, and I should send you this post, and this is one of the pieces in the museum that everybody loves to take pictures of and post. And what it is a corporate hierarchy of where public relations is in the bureaucracy. So you have chairman, CEO, and under that you have public relations director.
Wow. Yeah.
That's over here, and all the way down here, 5 levels below, you have advertising.
Yeah. It's interesting, very, very, very interesting. And your stories are all so fascinating that we could stay hours probably.
Yeah.
Anyone else has any question? If not, this is one question that we are repeating to all our guests. Which are the key competencies of the next decade from your point of view? You have already touched the need of being able to write, to understand what is newsworthy, but let us know if you think that there are other competencies that are needed for the next decade from your point of view.
Yeah, I think that, one time I asked Bernays, what is the best education for public relations students? And he said it should be 1/3 journalism, it should be 1/3 business, and it should be 1/3 social sciences. So social, anthropology, psychology, social psychology, understanding how people think. And I see a lot of kids taking those social sciences classes, but not as an applied sort of way. They're not taking it to understand what that means for public relations. And I wish that they would bridge that. I wish that social sciences could be taught as far as how it impacts how we do public relations. However, I think that a major piece that's missing is business, is how companies make money. And after all, most of our clients are businesses trying to make more money using public relations strategies so they can build their own businesses. But most of us don't know what the hell goes on in a company. How does a company make money? What's the difference between revenue and profit? And then why a company goes public and what that means. And so the business side of it, we've got to be able to talk to our client in the terms that are important to him. we should not be going into a client meeting and just talking public relations. We've got to talk about what his business problems are and better understand them before we could really do a good job for them.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes. Deborah probably want to make a question. I give you the microphone, Deborah, please.
Yes, yes. In fact, I'm with you, Shelley, because I am a combination of business developer and communicator and PR. So your last mention on the need to be very much on top of what's going on in the company. Eventually, what's the objective? What are the goals of the company that are commercial goals? Is very important also for the communicator. And during the last webinar that we had organized by Biagio with a Spanish professor on PR, he has also mentioned this, and apparently in Spain there is plenty of demand for communicators who also have a business development background, or at least an economy background. So this is, you captured what is already becoming a trend, I understand, in Europe as well. So thank you for mentioning that, Shelley.
Oh, of course. I appreciate what you said about that. It is very, very important. And I wish that there was a World Commission of Public Relations Education that would mandate that students take, courses in finance, right, and investor relations, and the difference between public and private, and all these things that we really have to know to do our jobs. And that part about the business, where we're dealing with, most of the clients are businessmen, it's extremely important, and we tend to forget that.
Yesterday there was a very interesting meeting between communicators organized by Ferpi in Milan, and there were communicators from very large Italian companies, some of which are also multinationals. And some of the messages that were given were, this is about corporate communication. It hasn't much to do with business, So it's a kind of cultural challenge that we need to overcome here, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, overall, if we're to gain the respect of the CEOs and the top management, we've got to go in and talk to them about what their problems are in their language. We can't go in there talking about, what we do. We have to totally understand what their problems are, so that we can come up with solutions for them.
Another area that I find has a lot of emphasis in this market in Italy is the targeting consumers. No? For many communicators, it looks like there are just the consumers, and while targeting the business-to-business, PR and the relations are less mentioned, less known. And so they're satisfied if a major Italian TV broadcast, a national TV broadcast, talks about the company or the innovation. But then if you ask them, but what's your PR with the business community? And then, it becomes a little bit more awkward, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. PR today is, for the most part, for consumer products, and not for larger corporate PR, crisis counseling, and investor relations, those bigger things.
Thank you.
Tony, do you have a question?
Well, yeah. I'm fascinated by what you've been discussing with Deborah and with Francesco. I think there are a lot of interesting things which are coming up. One major, I think, threat to coexistence and development of our profession is that we all think that we're right, and we don't have a critical attitude, and therefore we tend to say that the others are wrong. And if we tend to say that the others are wrong, we don't listen to what they have to say. So that's I think it's something that whatever we should do, whether it's the museum or it's something else, this is something we should really worry seriously about when we look at ourselves in the mirror in the morning, whether one shaves or not. Depends. Now, for example, let me give you one example, Shelley, because this is very important for the people around the line here. For example, we are approaching the 50th so-called anniversary of our professional association. Formerly, the Ferpi was constituted by the integration of two pre-existing organizations in 1970. And so we are approaching the 70th year of our association. In fact, this is bullshit, if I may say so. Everybody who has to do with finance, with business, with economics knows very well that when you merge with another organization, the two organizations, the one that has the earliest date is the date of the beginning of the organization. Now, in 1952, which is not 1970, the Institute for PR in Italy was formed by a then Minister of Finance. And it organized the Oscar di Bilancio, which everybody in Italy knows is a very important event. Why we incorporated, I remember incorporating it myself with another lady in 1982, the 1952 Institute for PR. Why can we not work on something like this? Because there's such an enormous amount of history that we can work on together with Shelley and all the other people who are online and elsewhere, and we can work together on doing something which is really meaningful for our youngsters. Just to give you an example of the potential that we have.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. In fact, probably we can also contribute to the Museum of PR.
Yeah, of course. Of course.
Running with a lot of.
Barry, Shelley, it was great to see you. Really wonderful. Thank you very much.
Oh,
So,
great to see you too, Tony.
Thank you very much, Shelley. It was really a pleasure. I have recorded the session. If it's not a problem, I would send it to the people that were on the chat on the webinar, also to you and to anyone who would request the registration. But before I want your approval.
Of course.
Okay. Thank you very much again, and I wish we can come to New York with an Italian mission in the next years. We are revamping the international initiative, so probably why not?
So come.
Thank you very much and goodbye. Thank you to everybody. I will close the webinar. Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.